Hello, everybody, and welcome to Boston Balling. I am your host, Gabby Hurlbut. Welcome to almost Friday. I'm very happy for you. You almost made it to the end of the week, so congratulations on that. Football season is now officially past us. We all got to watch the Chiefs win again the Super Bowl. And to be honest with you, it was kind of a lose lose outcome for me. I wasn't particularly excited about either outcome, but I certainly would not have liked to enjoy seeing KC win. I would have probably preferred San Francisco. However, we can't always get everything we want in life, but I hope you had a fantastic Super Bowl weekend. And now we are on to the draft and other exciting things related to football that we're going to be touching on today's show. But I'm excited to introduce a guest that I have with me today. He has done so much in the sports industry and is a big Boston sports guy. Christian Arcand, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Gabby. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to be on with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on with me. It's always nice to connect with people who are just truly Boston fans and also, work in the industry covering those teams because it's just such a passionate fan base to be a part of. And it really takes a special person to really be as invested as we are in, our teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I grew up in the city, so it's not everyone I work with is a Boston native. You got a lot of people. Mego's from Maryland.
Yeah.
Jones is from Vermont, which is he likes the Boston teams, but he's not a native. And so even like over at the other station, like Felger's from Wisconsin, and Fred and Hardy are both from Detroit. So I mean, like, there's a lot of out-of-staters who are doing sports talk in Boston right now, and they should all go back to where they came from. I think. Let
I
us
know, right?
Bostonians tell everybody
Honestly.
how it is.
I know, honestly. Yeah, I know for you, I mean, obviously growing up in the city, just right in the heart of everything Boston. So it's probably so cool for you to be able to cover those teams that you grew up watching.
Yeah, they make fun of me on the show because I talk about the North End a lot, but I grew up in the North End in the 80s, which was probably the last like decade when there was real families there. Everybody started moving out, and there's still families who live there, but we were some of the last ones. And then we moved out to the suburbs when I was 10 or 11. But growing up there, we were right by the Garden, and my dad was a Celtics season ticket holder back in the Big Three era, the first Big Three era,
That's
and he was a big fan of theirs back in like the Bill Russell days. So he really passed that on down to me, and I was just a big part of my life going to those games or going to Fenway. We didn't go to as many Patriots games just because that was a long way to go, and we didn't have season tickets, so it was just sort of one of those things. They also weren't very good back then,
yeah.
but the Celtics were just such a hot ticket, and I remember getting off the bus from school and walking over to the Garden, and we go watch Larry Bird. It was pretty cool.
That is so cool. And honestly, the environment at TD Garden is truly unbelievable. Not even just for playoff games, but regular season games. I mean, you go there and the atmosphere makes it feel like a playoff game, even if it's
Yeah,
not.
it really does. And the old Garden was like that too. The old Boston Garden. It was
Yeah.
it was a really old building, and I was there sort of at the end of it. Like, I was like 10 or 11 when it got torn down. And I remember going to games, and like we'd sit next to the railing, down the steps, and you could see the thing moving. Like, when it was like important, you could see the thing like shaking, which you don't get that so much in the TD Garden. It's a lot more structurally sound, I think, but
Yeah, right.
it's the same atmosphere. You're right about that.
Yeah. No, it's definitely so much fun going to those games. And luckily, the two teams that play in that building are giving us something to be excited about this winter. And I definitely want to get your input on both of those teams here on the show. But first, I definitely wanted to hear a little bit more about kind of your career path and how you really landed where you are.
Well, I feel bad when I talk about this because a lot of the avenues that I took to sort of get to where I am they're kind of closed off now, which is really unfortunate. And I think been sort of a detriment to the whole ecosystem of it. It's a tough business, and it's a tough industry for sure. And you're seeing a lot of changes in it recently. But when I was sort of coming up, I did college radio. I went to college in Colorado, and I did college radio. But when I was a senior in high school, I interned at WBOS, over at the time. It was over in the old building Sports Hub was in Dorchester on Morrissey Boulevard, which I ended up working there again, which is kind of weird. But so that was like when I first really started getting into it. I was a promotions intern, so I didn't do a lot of on-air stuff. But when I was in college, I did college radio, and I was a PA announcer for a semi-pro football team out there. And I always knew I wanted to do sports. I was doing like sort of music at the time. The sports stations didn't want some kid from Boston talking, poisoning their airwaves. So I didn't get a lot of opportunities there, but I was doing music radio with some friends and, my old roommates and stuff. They were all DJs. And it really sort of helped me get reps on air and become comfortable with my voice on air and, my delivery and sort of those things. You sort of listen back and pick what works and what doesn't. I still do that now. I've been on the air a long time, but I still am always trying to improve and do that. And that started pretty early on. It wasn't until I moved back to Boston in 2009, 2010-ish, that I really made a push towards sports radio again. And I started in New Hampshire. There was a job fair at TD Garden, and there was a station called WGAM, which is now a music station. I think they play like big band music, like Cab Calloway. That's what it is now. It's an AM radio station, so it was sort of working from a disadvantage anyway. But that was my first real sports radio job, and it was just like producing a golf show on the weekends. And that eventually became producing another morning show, and then I got my own weekend show, and then I was doing a drive time show. And that station also carried Red Sox games. So we had, a little bit of an audience, not a big one, but, people sort of knew about us up there. And that station also is where Rich Keefe worked and Mike Manansky worked before they got hired at EEI. So I was pretty confident. I was like, all right, this is a pipeline into Boston, and maybe this will, open up some doors for me. And it did. And the other door it opened up was this company called Metro, which what they do, Total Traffic Metro, it's basically this company, and what they do is they have a studio, and people go into their various studios, and they'll do for radio stations weather, sports, lottery numbers, school closings, like all the different updates that you have on a general news show. And the reason they were doing it is so the stations could just have an agreement with Total Traffic and, not have to pay someone independently. So it was kind of a cost-saving measure that they used, but EEI was using it for their sports flashes. So I got in with that through this guy, John Ryder, who used to work at EEI, and he recommended me for Metro, and I started doing the sports flashes like on weekends and stuff. And that's kind of how I broke in. At the time, the night show at EEI was Planet Mikey. Do you remember Planet Mikey? No. Okay. So he was the night guy at EEI, and he was this cool old dude. I still talk to him sometimes. He's kind of this old hippie, and he really was a big old timey sports fan. And his show was fun. It was sort of like in the summer, it was preempted by the Red Sox a lot, but the rest of the year he'd be on all night. And he was just this kind of weird offbeat guy. And they put him with this guy Mike Manansky, and the two of them really didn't get along. And I was doing the sports flash for their show, and the program director was this guy, Joe, called me in, and he said, hey, Mike and Mike, they're both named Mike. They're not doing well. They're very at odds all the time. Would you be open to going in there and sort of trying to diffuse the tension between them? And I was like, yeah, it was a day part on EEI, and I wasn't just doing headlines anymore. They wanted me to actually be part of the show. And so I jumped at it, and that was just kind of good luck. But the reason why I say I don't like talking about this is because a lot of the smaller radio stations just shut down, like the small sports stations have all just kind of did. GAM went away. There's a station in Vermont. I'm pretty sure the Rhode Island station, there's a couple sports stations down there. I think one of them shut off, the main station. A couple of other New Hampshire stations that I knew of anyway at the time sort of came and went. And that just became like a thing. It's hard to support it. And, these owners generally aren't big time owners. They're sort of mom and pop owners in these other states. And that just became kind of a thing. And then Metro kind of closed off their agreement with EEI. And when that happened, I was just sort of lucky that I had gotten in with Planet Mikey, because everybody else who was doing the sports flash was over. And they just had the on-air host doing it. And by then I had sort of moved up in Planet Mikey to become an on-air host. But if I hadn't, if I was just part of the Total Trap, that would have been it for me. So a lot of it's good timing, a lot of it's sort of good luck, but you got to make the most of your opportunities. I like to think that I did. And after EEI, I went over to Sports Hub. I was there for 5 years, and I was laid off last fall, but I'm back at EEI now. And it's just you can never really predict where the career is going to go, but you just sort of wait for your opportunities and make the most of them. Is the advice I'd give.
Yeah, that's definitely really good advice. And like you mentioned before, it is a tough industry. It's a really competitive industry. And one thing that I've definitely taken away over the years is just being open to any opportunity, whether that means covering different sports that you aren't used to covering or diving into something that you didn't think you were really going to do. You kind of have to be open to doing different things and gaining that experience because it's only going to help lead you to bigger opportunities down the road.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And you have to be ready to sort of just say yes to anything. The only thing I would say is that, a lot of times companies know that and they want to take advantage of it. And
Yeah.
to younger people trying to come up in broadcasting, I would just say, do things like that. And, obviously you're going to have to work for free sometimes, but don't just take every free job just because it's free, like just because it's experience, because eventually, it's just that becomes part of their plan. That becomes part of how they do their hiring and cost analysis and stuff like that. And I don't know. I hate to see someone getting taken advantage of. Like it happens to everybody at some point. But I just tell I tell people like you, just kind of keep an eye out for stuff like that, and make sure it's leading towards something, or that favor the jobs and the opportunities that you have that you think could lead to something more than that.
Yeah, and obviously, COVID was just such an unprecedented time. Like I was working at ESPN and then ended up getting laid off due to COVID, and it's just so hard, kind of bouncing back from something like that sometimes because when you get laid off, it's kind of discouraging because it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah.
And I definitely gained a lot of great experience there, though, and having worked at a company like that and just the reputation of what ESPN is has definitely helped put me in a better spot afterwards. But it definitely is tough, when those types of things happen. And I feel like COVID kind of amplified some of that too.
Yeah, it definitely did. During COVID, my contract was up at Sports Hub during COVID, and I had gotten a call from my PD saying, "Hey, listen, we just had a bad year, and we're not sure we're going to be able to re-up you." And I was like, "Okay, I mean, that sucks, but I guess I understand it. They're like, you can stay on part time or whatever, but like, we just don't think we can carry two people a night anymore." And I was devastated. And then the next day they said, "Hey, we moved some money around and we can do it, and we'll keep you, sign you for 2 more years." And then 2 years after that, that's when I got laid off. So it's like, and it was discouraging because the day I got laid off, the ratings came out the next day and our show was number one. Like we were number one for like 5 years, basically, at night. And, I know it's not like, it wasn't just me. One of the morning show producers at Toucher and Rich got laid off too. And, that show is a morning show. Like, so, nighttime having two people, there's not a lot of stations that have that. And so in a way, like I didn't like it, but I kind of understood what they were doing. But when they laid off someone from that morning show, considering how much money that thing brings in and how high their ratings are and how much more important morning is than nights, I was shocked. I think a lot of people were just shocked that a station that was doing as well as Sports Hub was laying anybody off, really. And that's just the reality of the industry right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's just a lot of people losing jobs in the industry. I mean, I'm seeing, a lot of people on LinkedIn and Twitter are just kind of saying, like, I'm on the job market now. And it's people who have definitely been through a lot in the industry and have a lot of experience. So you really never know, and it's just a tough industry, but definitely just got to keep grinding and doing what you're doing. And for me, I don't think I ever would have gotten involved with the podcasting side of things had that layoff not happened because it wasn't something that I ever really thought about doing until then.
Yeah.
So it just kind of is interesting what path you end up on that you might not have thought you were going to end up on.
Yeah, I did a podcast for a little while. So after I got laid off from Sports Hub, Mike Thomas, who was the guy who hired me at Sports Hub, went to Chicago and then came back to EEI. He's the market manager there. And when I got laid off from Sports Hub, he hired me back to EEI. So I owe that guy a ton. He's really been the big reason why I'm where I am right now. And I love my job. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I love my job. I love doing sports talk. It's really good. Getting paid to talk shit all day is awesome. It's really, like, it's really, I'm really happy. Like, it's a really fun thing to do. But I also, you just in the back of your mind, you always wonder, like, could it all go away tomorrow? And, it's just when you have experiences like that and things like that sort of go on in your career, it's just, it's just always going to be in the back of your mind. Like, you're never going to be able to shake it. So you just got to enjoy it and try and do the best shows you can. And,
yeah, right.
keep your fingers crossed, basically.
Yeah, and just keep hoping that everything goes well for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely all great advice. And obviously you're in a position where you have been able to talk about some very successful teams in Boston and some other not so successful teams in Boston. But one team that is pretty successful at this current moment in time is the Boston Celtics. Having a great season again, as we all expected them to. Just had a trade deadline where they made a couple small moves, and I definitely am interested in kind of your thoughts on their trade deadline that they had, because for me, I didn't think they had to do much. I mean, why would you make drastic moves when everything seems to be working really well as is? But I was happy to see them add a little bit of depth for the bench, because that was something I definitely thought they could benefit from. But I definitely am curious, what you thought about the trade deadline they had.
Well, I'll be honest, I didn't watch a lot of Xavier Tillman. I didn't really even know who he was at the time, and I watched a lot of basketball. And they're like, Celtics have traded for Xavier Tillman, and I sort of looked at everybody. I'm like, does anyone know who this is? And Ryan's like, oh yeah, he's on the Grizzlies. I know him. And I was like, okay. And I looked him up, and I was like, okay, I kind of remember this guy. He hasn't played yet for the Celtics, but I do like that profile. I was hoping for more of a natural wing. I was hoping they bring in someone who was more of a natural wing. This guy's more like a Grant Williams type, it seems like, sort of like a 6'7" big who can shoot a little bit, not really shoot threes, but he's got a good field goal percentage and plays good defense. And I think that's what they're really into and what they're really sort of excited about. And the kid they got from Philly, whose name escapes me at the moment, but he's played a lot for them this year. He's a good athletic combo guard, and he's a little bit more. I like him maybe a little bit more than Tillman, but I think all in all, yeah, the Celtics didn't have any big moves that they needed to make. I don't really care if they're active on the buyout market. I don't really like any of the buyout guys. And the only other person that I even considered was someone like Otto Porter, maybe one of these wings, just because I don't love the bench. Pritchard's fine. Hauser's fine. They're not. I'd rather like a more complete wing than someone like Hauser, who's more just a spot up shooter. Although he has had a few dunks this year, out of nowhere, Sam Hauser's like this dunking machine this year. That's basically, and that's like wanting the pinky ring. You got everything, and so now let's just add something else. I don't think they really need much help. But you get to the playoffs, and all of a sudden, rotation, 7 guys, 8 guys. How far deep into that bench do you really feel comfortable going after, Horford or Hauser and Pritchard? Is not much. And I do think you can even improve those guys a little bit, but not anything that I'm going to lose any sleep over.
Yeah, going into the season, the bench was definitely something that concerned me a little bit. I was saying, is this bench deep enough for a playoff run down the road? And even with Pritchard and Hauser, they're playing better this year than I thought they would. They're definitely stepping up into those elevated roles this year than what we've seen from them in the past. And they kind of had to step up in those positions. And I feel like they are playing good basketball overall off the bench. But my worry is the consistency with the bench. I think, when it comes down to playing these tough teams in the playoffs, because the playoffs are such an absolute grind and it really does feel like a different season than the regular season. Are those guys the types of guys that can step up in the big moments in the playoffs? That's still something I'm having trouble with getting behind. I think bringing in guys like Holiday and Porzingis, those were huge moves for Boston this year. They definitely are making a big difference in terms of the overall play of the team, and they're definitely helping Tatum and Brown to play. I mean, Jaylen Brown's playing some of the best basketball we've seen from him this year. Those two being a part of this team now, I think, have really helped elevate that. But these moves are interesting that they made. Brad Stevens hasn't really done much to give me a reason to not trust him. Because a lot of the things that he has done in his time in this position, I've liked. The question now just becomes, though, is it still enough pieces for them off the bench to where Missoula can feel confident with what he has? If they can keep up the way they're playing now, then I say yes. But it's definitely, I mean, there are some tough teams out there that could definitely give the Celtics a run for their money come postseason time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think in the Eastern Conference that they've shown they're head and shoulders above most of the rest of these teams. Milwaukee's really having trouble. The Sixers lost Embiid. The Knicks and the Cavs are sort of interesting, but I'm not really scared of either of those two teams. There's something you said I disagreed with. Now I can't remember what it is. Oh, Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown's not having a bad year, but his numbers are a little down from last year, I think. Considering the contract and all of that, I don't think he's playing poorly, but I don't know. I expect him to at least keep up with his numbers from last year. So I do think the Celtics are a very good team. I had really high expectations for them, so I'd say they've met those. In some respects. In some respects, too, I just looked this up. At the All-Star break last year, they had 43 wins, or 42 wins. This year they have 43, and it's like, they seem better than last year, but last year in March, they had a rough March and, kind of skipped a little bit there, and then obviously had trouble with Miami in the playoffs. And I think that's really what it comes down to for me is, do they have the killer instinct to be able to get past Miami if they end up even seeing them again this year? That was a close game they had with them on Super Bowl Sunday, a little too close for comfort, I thought, especially without Jimmy Butler playing. I know they also beat them by like 50 recently, too. They've been blowing teams out, too. So it's like it's hard to get too worked up either way. But I don't know. With the Celtics, like I've seen this before. That's sort of what it feels like. I've seen them have a great regular season before. I've seen them be first in offensive rating and defensive rating before. You haven't seen them be 5 games better than any other team in the league. Like that's sort of new. But, you add Porzingis and Holiday, like you said, like that should make you better. And they are better. I just don't know how much better. Like that's sort of what I'm still hung up on. Like, are they so much better than last year that they can overcome some of those problems that they had in the playoffs? It was way too dicey to get past Doc Rivers and the Sixers. Going down 3-0 to Miami was just inexcusable, even though they had to come back. And even going back the year before, like they should have beat the Warriors. Like they were up on them and then lost 4 straight, whatever it was. Like that was brutal watching that. So to overcome that, it's a makeup thing, like Jason Tatum has to take that next step. He has to be that guy down the stretch who can get you, buckets when you need them. Porzingis has to be able to step in and be healthy, and I think that's sort of a question mark too. He's missed like 15 games this year. And Jaylen Brown, Jaylen Brown still has trouble at the free throw line, and he still doesn't have great handles. He turns the ball over a lot. So, all of those guys have question marks. And all of them are going to have to answer those questions for this team to win it all. And I think that's possible, but it's not a guarantee, that's for sure.
No, I mean Porzingis coming in, the injuries definitely were a concern with him. They've been a concern. It's going to be something that is going to be a major problem down the stretch if they can't rely on him consistently in a lot of those big games, because they do need him if they want to win the whole thing this year. So that's definitely something that I'm concerned about. But when you look at this team in general compared to last year, I think there are certain things that they are doing better. For example, closing out close games at the end. They're completing those games a lot better than last year's team that would lose a lot of those types of games down the stretch. Mm-hmm. They're finding ways to win a lot of those games, which I think is something that separates them from last year's team. One thing I will say, is Missoula equipped now that he has the experience in the postseason to lead this team this year through a finals run? Because obviously we saw what happened last year. They went down against Miami. That was ridiculous. And then the comeback got me a little too excited because I really thought that they were going to finish that. And
that game with the tip in, I mean, yeah, I think everybody believed after that one.
I had so much faith. I know the Derek White game, that was just so legendary. But, obviously Missoula still has a lot to prove as a head coach, especially when it comes to playing in the postseason, and the other experienced coaches that are in the Eastern Conference that are going to be there, that's still something to me that I'm going to be wondering down the stretch is how is he going to handle certain situations better than he did last year.
Yeah, well, if you got Milwaukee, it's Doc Rivers, so you don't have to worry about that. But
Yeah,
I guess
right.
for some of the other
That
ones,
made that whole thing made no sense to me. I still can't
yeah.
believe that they did that, and that it's just not working out for them so far. But
I know. And remember them dancing around after he got fired? Remember that they were dancing in a circle and it's like when they lost 4 straight? I hate that. I hate when people react that way to someone getting fired. Even if it's someone you really hated, like be a professional, Like you look
yeah,
like a bunch of a-hole kids. Brooke Lopez is like
honestly,
35 dancing around. Like, what's the matter with you?
yeah, it's
And
crazy.
Giannis is starting to take on, like I always liked him
Me
and I love
too.
his story. And, I think he's a great player and everything, but he's turning into a little bit of a coach killing diva, Like
Yeah, he is.
I don't like the way he's been coming off lately. But, in terms of can Joe Mazzulla handle this, I think that it really depends who he's coaching against. Eric Spoelstra, Eric Spoelstra had something for Brad Stevens. He had something for, did they play? Yeah, Ime Udoka. That was a 7-game series. The Celtics won. But Butler, if he hit that three, I mean, that goes another way. So Eric Spoelstra's had something for all three of these Celtics coaches. And that's something you can't, you can't count out. And Missoula's the least experienced out of all three of them, I'd say, obviously. But I like him. I think he's starting to grow on me a little bit. There's some things that I like him to switch up. I wish he wasn't so stubborn on certain, strategies and things like that. But he's consistent at the very least. Like he doesn't double back on things; he doubles down, and I do appreciate that in the coach. But we'll see. He learned a lot last year. I think we'll see if he applies it this year.
Yeah, that's definitely the hope. It's tough with a team having to make the adjustment they did after everything that happened with Ime and to then adapt to having Missoula take over. Like I'm sure there was definitely a little transition period there for the players too. And then they go in, they have the season they had last year, they go into the postseason, they have the experience being coached by him in the playoffs. And experience is a big thing. And hopefully now, they have that experience with him running the show to the point where they can kind of learn from what happened last year and go into the postseason this year with just a different mindset and a different way of doing things. And I think that's another benefit also to having somebody like Holiday on the team is his experience. And he's somebody who can kind of help with guiding some of these younger players when it comes to this big postseason run. And Tatum and Brown, I mean, they have a lot to prove still. With their time here in Boston. I mean, there's been some really talented players with them on this roster, and this Celtics team is, on paper a team that very much should win the whole thing, but then you put all the pieces together and it's like, okay, well, can Tatum be consistent in the playoffs? Can, Jalen step up his play a little bit in the postseason? Because that was another thing to me last year was Tatum was very hot and cold in the postseason. And that's something that absolutely just cannot happen.
Yeah, it's true. And, it's sort of to me like I think about they are the favorites. They've been the favorites all year. They've had the best record in the league most of the year. They're 5 games up on Minnesota, who I think has the next best record. And it really just to me comes down to what happens if they don't win. Like if they blow it again this year, what does that mean? I mean, they put a super team together. In essence, they got all these all stars. 4 out of the 5 starters are all stars. White should have been an all star probably this year instead of Scotty Barnes. He's all defense last year. Like they have all the tools and all the pieces to win. So what happens if they don't? Well, if they don't, then questions about Jason Tatum and his ability to sort of finish off a series, win the big game. Jaylen Brown. I mean, those two are going to have to face that. They're not kids anymore. We all watch them sort of grow up and excel and really shatter everybody's expectations of what they could do. Have them both be all NBA last year. I mean, listen, it's perfect. It's a storybook kind of careers for both of those guys. But if they can't win, then the weight and expectations of all that's going to land on them. And it's not going to be pretty, like especially for Jaylen Brown. Like Jason Tatum, I think, is in the MVP conversation, and he's going to skate on this. I think he usually does anyway. But Jaylen Brown's going to catch the brunt of it. He just signed a supermax. He's going to start making that money next year. People are going to question if him and Tatum can win together. And when that happens, what's the next question? What can you get for him in a trade? And listen, I know he's going to make a lot of money, but there's no such thing as an untradeable contract in the NBA. Chris Paul had an untradeable contract. Russell Westbrook had an untradeable contract. Russell Wilson does too, actually. But, those guys all got traded. Some of them got traded for each other. Like, there's no such thing as an untradeable contract. You can swing a deal if you need to. So, that's the next step. And if they don't win, those questions are going to come up. I'm probably going to be asking them along with, a lot of the people I work with. And that's just the way it is. When you're this good, that's fair. It's all fair, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with those two, earlier on in their careers, the word experience kept coming up, lack of experience in those big games, but that's no longer an excuse anymore because they have been to the finals. So now they know what it's like to get all the way there. Now it's just a matter of why are they able to get as far as they're going, but they're not able to actually finish the job. And I am confident that they have the right pieces around them right now to be able to finish the job, but a lot of things have to come into place. And, it just goes back to all these little things we talked about before, like the bench performing at the level they need to perform at. Mazzulla, what's his decision-making going to be like in the postseason? Tatum and Brown, are they going to be consistent? Because I remember talking to a lot of people on Twitter, before the season started, just about where they stacked up to teams like the Bucks or the Sixers or other competitive teams in the East. And, I said, I don't really have doubts about the regular season. My concern comes to the playoffs because we've seen this before, and I need to see more consistency from the Jays when it comes to postseason time in order to get behind this team really winning a championship. Because you mentioned it before, we've seen them in this spot where they are having a very good regular season, and Tatum and Brown are, playing well, and it's just like, what happens when it comes to the playoffs that changes that? So that still is a thing to me. Like, I feel good right now, but I also felt good last year.
That's uneasiness that this team gives you. It's real. I get it too. And the other thing is, like, if they don't make it to the finals, it's going to be a big disappointment. But even if they make it to the finals and lose, you can't use the excuse, like last year you could say, 2 years ago, you could say, hey, it was their first time in the finals. It's like Kyle Shanahan. Like, Kyle Shanahan's like, well, it was his first time in the Super Bowl. He's coached in 3 Super Bowls now, and he's lost all 3. So eventually, you can't say they don't have experience anymore. Eventually, you have to move on to, okay, they have experience, they just can't win. They have experience, they just choke, or they, just aren't clutch, or whatever. Whatever it is you land on for the reason for it. But, like, that's the way it is, Like the Pacers in the 90s and the 2000s, they made it to the finals a few times. They were in the playoffs every year. They made it to the Eastern Conference Finals a bunch, and Reggie Miller and Rick Smits and all those guys, they lose to Jordan, they lose to the Knicks, they lose to whoever, and they get to the finals, they lose to the Lakers. Like, you lose, like Reggie Miller never won one, and they were there a lot, and that's my big fear for these Celtics, is that they'll just be, Reggie Miller and the Pacers, and you'll remember them and you'll talk about them, and they'll be, in the DVDs for the teams and DVDs. That was an old time reference right there, but they'll be in the season wrap ups for the teams that win the championship. Oh, you had to beat the Celtics to get there, but if you don't win one, then that's all you're going to be, and that's that sucks. I think that they can do it this year. I mean, I think they're definitely good enough. They're plainly good enough. Just can they grind through it? Can they get there? Are they mentally tough enough to do so? We'll find out.
Yeah, it's a grind in the postseason. It really is. It's hard to win a championship, and sometimes I feel like people don't always think about, the mental aspect of it. Like, it's not just your physical play on the basketball court. There's so much more that goes into being able to come together and win when it matters. And that's what's, there's so much pressure is on them this year. A lot of people, just basketball fans in general, are expecting them to win. So it's almost like anything other than winning the finals is just considered a disappointment this year.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, like the Thunder are a good team, and they're in Oklahoma City, so you don't have the same kind of expectations you get in Boston, and that's another part of it. Like we just talked about it. the fan base here is crazy. You see what the tickets are like for these games? They're astronomical. So like,
Yeah.
that's part of it too. The expectations come from the fan base. They're coming nationally now from Stephen A. Smith and everybody else. Stephen A. I just heard was going on some big rant about how Jason Tatum should be the MVP favorite. I guarantee you that bump him up a little bit. He's like sixth on the Kia MVP ladder right now. I bet you he's up to fourth or fifth by the next time that comes out, maybe even third. You'll see that. You'll see the narrative start to shift because he's the best player on the best team. But again, that doesn't mean anything if you get embarrassed in the playoffs.
I know. Oh my gosh, I know. It's just it's that hump. It's like it feels like they're just like on this constant like high, and then they get to the playoffs and it gets like stalled like close to the top, and then they just can't get all the way to the top. It's just it's such an irritating, year after year thing. And then another team in Boston that kind of has been in a similar situation the last few years has been the Bruins. I mean, they haven't been able to get over their hump either. And last year felt like a year for them. I mean, just the historic season that they had. All of this hype surrounding them going into the postseason last year to then finish the way that they finished in such a disappointing fashion last year. With so much talent on that team. And then they come into this season, obviously with high expectations again after the regular season they had last year. Definitely not quite having like the same, caliber of a regular season as they had last year, because that was just really nuts what they did last year. But, still a fun team, still definitely a good team. A lot of guys who I'm happy are getting a lot of opportunity this year for them. What would you say is kind of your biggest concern when it comes to the Bruins and their ability to, kind of finish the job this year?
Well, that's it right there. Like their offseason was sort of weird because they ended up signing a bunch of guys I wanted them to sign like 7 or 8 years ago, like Shattenkirk and Van Riemsdyk and those guys. And Van Riemsdyk's been a great addition. Like I really like what he's been doing this year. But, they just talked about moving him down or, juggling the lines a little bit. I actually haven't seen the game tonight. I don't know what line he's on tonight. But I know in the last game, Montgomery talked about that, and then they did it. They juggled some lines around. And I don't have a big problem with doing that, especially after the All-Star break. You want to get like a kickstart for your team. But I do worry, this team used to run out of gas, in the last days of Chara, the Krejci and Bergeron years, and I like those guys, but you see it, you've seen them disappear in the playoffs before. You've seen Marchand disappear in the Cup final before. These guys, they're great players, but they do run out of gas. That's been a problem. And when I saw them going after these old guys in the offseason, I was like, hope that doesn't come back to bite him. In the case of someone like Van Riemsdyk, he's been a big contributor this year. Shattenkirk's been fine, but you sort of look around and think, well, what does this team need? They got the deadline coming up too. What do they need? And they were active at the deadline last year. They went out and got Hathaway and Bertuzzi and Orlov. Like they made a bunch of moves, and they all seemed like great moves at the time because the regular season was just everything they did, everything they touched turned to gold. And then that first round, Florida and Kachuk and all that. I mean, it was just it makes me like sick thinking about that. The Bruins are the only team when their season ends sometimes, like I get like physically sick. Like after they lost to St. Louis, I had like a reaction to that. I think a lot of people did. Like that was
such a painful.
Oh, that was awful. And last year was awful, like really awful. The Celtics, when they lost to the Heat, that was bad, but there was something there. At least it was in the conference final. Like it was different from this. And I don't know.
I think the way they lost too, like there were multiple times that they could have closed out that series.
Yeah.
Like they had multiple opportunities to finish that series, and every time Florida would just keep coming back in, and it just kept happening. And I think that to me was the most frustrating thing, was even all the way up through into game 7, they could have won that game and closed out that game, and then they just couldn't do it in the last seconds of regulation.
Yeah. And I mean, that was that was a tough year last year. Losing Bergeron and losing Krejci, I think, was something a lot of people thought would impact this team more than it did. I think Coyle's been great this year. I think that Zacha's been really good. I thought he was going to be a little bit better, but he's been steady on that second line. And I think Coyle's done a very good job of sort of stepping in. being the centerman for Marchand. Because you thought, all right, well, Bergeron's gone. What kind of effects is that going to have on Marchand? Marchand's having a terrific year without Bergeron, which I'm surprised by. And I think that's, a pleasant sort of thing to have happened. But it didn't just happen out of nowhere. Coyle really stepped up and has been terrific. Pasternak's been great. You haven't seen as much. I don't know. I haven't seen as much as I like from some of the young guys. And it's a shame about Patriots and that injury for him. But, the goaltending's good. The defense has been strong. I think that they're going to get the scoring if they need it. They just need to. I'd try and make some reinforcements at the deadline. I think they could go out and shore up their top or bottom six forwards. Really, either one you could probably find a space for an upgrade there. But what's it going to cost? Do they have the draft capital? They spent a ton in draft capital last year at the deadline. Can you do that 2 years in a row? Eventually, that comes back to get you. But I also sort of feel like they have the best record. Like they're the top team in the NHL again. You have to capitalize on this because you don't know. You could have some lean years ahead of this. You never know. Like it's really a crapshoot. But I would say now they need to keep pushing. And I think Sweeney needs to keep pushing, and they need to continue to work on this roster.
Yeah, it's kind of a similar situation to where the Celtics were at their trade deadline, because it's like, well, they're playing so well right now, so it's like, how many moves do you actually want to make? Because how much do you want to change? If things are going well right now? But they definitely could use some pieces. And hockey is such a difficult sport when it comes to the playoffs too, because that very much is like this team is hot at the right time and they go through and they, barrel through teams. Like that Florida team last year, I mean, nobody expected them to go as far as they did. They just started playing their best at the right exact time. And that's the hardest thing about this sport is, you could be the best team in the world during the regular season, but it's totally so much different come postseason time. And for them, that's definitely something I'm looking out for too this year, is you just never really know with hockey. It's such a different game in the playoffs.
Yeah, it really is. And one thing that's really been a big strength for them is their goaltending. But I'm of the belief that, you got two top 10 goaltenders. You could trade one of them and probably do pretty well. Probably get a pretty good return for Ullmark if that's who you want to trade. I'd rather trade Ullmark than Swayman. I like Swayman a little bit better, but that's something they have to consider. And I like Ullmark too. Ullmark was unbelievable last year. But he ran out of gas at the end. He got hurt at the end, and he wasn't as effective in that last series. And they've been rotating and decided, nope, no more rotation. We're just going to stick with one goalie, and that was that. And if they're going to do that this year, I'd rather it be Swayman. So that's something I think they should consider. And I know that having two goalies is a good thing, but even historically, like Osgood and Hasek, or like Van Beesbrook and Richter and the Rangers or whatever, like those guys weren't together very long. Like eventually one of them, you trade one of them, or one of them wants to be the main starter somewhere and they get, mouthy and want out or whatever. But, it's a luxury that I feel like if the Bruins were a dynasty winning a bunch of cups, you'd say, oh yeah, let's just keep doing this because look at how well it's working. But they're not, and they need help in other parts of the team, and they still have a great goalie if they trade one of them. So that's something that I think they need to seriously consider.
Yeah, it's definitely a good problem to have. I mean, I remember actually saying this on Twitter. I was like, if you have a situation where you have two really talented goaltenders in Ullmark and Swayman, like that's such a good problem to have, because like you said, regardless of what you do, like if you move one of them, you're still very much in a good situation at goaltender. And, I think Swayman definitely has so much talent, and he is that guy that, is likely going to be here for the future. So when you're thinking about kind of, what the future of this team is going to look like, it kind of makes more sense to me to have Swayman here if you are going to move somebody, because he, I think, is that guy that is going to ultimately be the right man for the job moving forward down the road. So if they do move somebody, I also agree that I think it should be Ullmark, just because, I really like a lot of what Swayman's been doing this year.
Yeah, me too. I think he's really, really good. He's a nice guy. I've met him a couple of times. He's a good guy. And he's younger, true, but I mean, if he does what you want, like if they win a cup with him, then they're going to have to pay him. So, I mean, that's, something that's going to eat into the rest of the roster. And, we sort of saw how that could be an issue with Tuukka. Tuukka was making a lot of money. He had that big contract, and, they didn't win anything with him, but he felt like he was worth it because, he won a Vezina. He was constantly in the top of like save percentage and all that. So it's a tough one. It's tough to have two. It's good to have two when they're both relatively cheap. I know Allmark's making like $5-6 million, and Swayman's not making very much. So
But eventually
eventually,
it's
yeah,
gonna
the bill
come out.
comes. But I understand why they're trying to milk this as long as they can. I just sort of feel like okay, it's nice to have this, but it is a luxury. We do have some
Yes.
areas of need on the roster.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that they could get a good return too. I think this is the time to move one of them if they are going to move one of them because they're both having good seasons, again. And I think if they want to get a really good return for one of them, you might as well do that now when their value is higher so that you can address other areas of the roster of need. And, if you don't do it now, it might be harder later on to move them for the type of return that you would hope that you want to move them for.
Yeah, definitely. And last year, I mean, I understand not doing it last year because I didn't want to trade Swayman, period.
Yeah.
And Allmark was having a Vezina season, so it's like you can't trade a guy in the middle of a season like that, as good as he was playing. But I would have liked him maybe to sort of recognize the fact that he wasn't moving as well, and maybe put Swayman in a little bit more in that Florida series. But again, that's all bygones from last year. But I do sort of wonder now, like, are they going to switch that up? If they get into a playoff series now, are they just going to say, all right, Allmark, you've been our starter. We're going to go with that same strategy of just, riding you into the ground, even if we've been rotating you with Swayman like 50-50 basically this year. Are they going to do that again? I hope not. But you sort of, you only get one crack at it once the playoffs start. You really only have one opportunity. And if you blow it, then, it's just another wasted opportunity that you could have – and that happened before too. In that Islanders series, Tuukka played with like a torn groin, and Swayman was perfectly healthy, ready to play. And there was like, you're gonna put Tuukka in with a torn groin? Like,
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Yeah, that really pissed me off. Like, it's like, I understand sort of the idea that you feel loyal to your goalie, and I know that hockey players are all weird about their goalies, but like, do what's best for the team. And there were two times I think when playing Swayman would have been the better thing for the team, and they didn't do it.
Yeah, even thinking back to that Florida series last year, I don't really remember a lot of what Montgomery said in terms of the reasoning behind making that decision with the goaltenders because of what they had been doing all season and how it had been working. And I was just very confused as to why he decided to do that. And I don't really remember what explanation he gave after the fact as to why he went with that.
I do sort of remember him just kind of saying, like, this is, in the playoffs, this is what the plan was always going to be. And part of it I understand, because if you get a hot goalie in the playoffs, then you can go all the way to the cut. That's how the Bruins won. I mean, Tim Thomas got hot as hell, and then they went all the way to the end. And that's happened with other teams. Bennington, the year that St. Louis beat us, and some of these other ones. Like, that's just the way it works. So I understand wanting to stick with one guy and hoping that he gets hot and hoping that he starts playing that way. But when it seems like they're physically not able to, that's when it's like, okay, so then it's not going to happen with him. It's not going to happen with Tuukka. His groin is torn. He's not going to be your hot goalie. And with Allmark, you could kind of tell with him too. He wasn't playing his normal game last year in that series, and it just sort of he looked different. So it's like, go with the healthy guy at the very least. Maybe he'll be the hot one, but you'll never know if you leave the injured guy in there. So that was the big problem I had with it. I understand the logic of just wanting to go with one guy and sticking with him, but you can't expect an injured player to do that. That's ridiculous, and they tried it twice.
Yeah, that was crazy. I was like, why is he even playing? Because obviously, if he's not 100%, he's not going to be able to give you 100%.
Yeah, and he got hurt in the regular season. It's not like it sprung up on him in the middle of the series. Like, I forget what it was. The second to the last home game or something was one of the last games of the year is when he came out of the game with an injury. I was there. Jones and I went to that game, actually. And it was Mego's birthday, whenever that was. She was out of town. But, yeah, it was one of the last games of the regular season. And he came out in, like, the third period, I think, and Swayman finished the game. And then we found out he had a groin injury or something, too. And it's like, all right, so play Swayman. That's simple. Just, all right, you have an excuse. Just put Swayman in there and see what he can do. And I feel like they haven't given him that opportunity yet.
No. And I'm hoping that this is the year that he gets that opportunity because I think he's earned it a lot. And, I'd be interested in seeing how that correlates in the postseason.
Yeah.
I think he deserves that shot. And, maybe they'll try that and they'll see that it works and then they'll just stick with that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see.
That would be my hope.
A lot can happen between now and then, like
Yep.
there's so much hockey still to go, and who knows what happens by that point. But I'm sort of hoping that too. I think that enough's enough, really. Like let the kid play. Let's see what he can do. Let's see what kind of playoff performer he is.
And also, if you want him to be a piece of this team for the future moving forward, like it makes sense to give him that type of experience and have him play a lot in those types of games to set him up to be able to keep doing that moving forward. I just think, now is the time to give him those opportunities. And if he doesn't perform up to expectations, at least they gave him the chance to do it and he can hopefully continue to grow from that.
Yeah, and then you deal with that next year or whatever. But yeah, I just I don't know. This team has a lot going for it, obviously, and they're a tough matchup and a tough draw. And I don't know how they're doing against the Kraken right now, so I may look stupid saying all this if they're getting their ass kicked. But
I haven't looked yet.
Yeah, they well also I mean outside of that Vancouver game, they haven't looked great since the break.
No, they
that's
really haven't.
They've had some pretty ugly losses, and they got booed off the ice against Washington. So I mean, there's definitely room for improvement. They're gonna have to start being real serious about how they're going to address that because they clearly need to do something.
Yeah, that first game back from the break, I was like, okay, clearly the Bruins still think they're on the break right now because it's just so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have high hopes for them too. Both of these two teams, have a chance again at a run, but you never know. It's such a different animal in the postseason, so let's just hope for success from at least one of them, because our football team right now is in a tough spot. I don't really know like exactly how to describe like what's going on with them now because I mean there's change, like this is such a big change for the Patriots, like new coaching, just something that we're not used to. So I'm really interested in kind of seeing how they utilize this upcoming draft and the offseason free agency. Like, what do they do to improve this roster? There's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And there's been a lot of controversy that I've seen over how they actually utilize that number 3 pick in the draft. Do they take a quarterback? Do they try to address another position on the roster and hope they can get a rookie quarterback later on that they can kind of develop under somebody, like do they try to give Mac Jones another shot? Like, what do you think that they are going to end up doing with that pick?
I think they're gonna draft a quarterback. They've been sort of signaling that for a while now. Gerard Mayo sat down with Steve Burton right after his press conference, and he's like, "Yeah, we're gonna use that pick for a position we really need." And like, wink, wink. And there's been reports out of Foxborough that's what they're sort of angling for. I think the Crafts probably want to draft a quarterback. That's something you can sell after a really bad year, and that's it. I mean, like the impact of this last year is one that's going to echo through Gillette Stadium all season. I mean, it's just it's like a cloud that's going to be over the stadium. Now, Bill's not there anymore. You got this documentary coming out, I think tonight. Right? Does it come out at like midnight tonight? The first episode or whatever?
Yeah, today's the 15th. That's right.
Yeah, and the end of it, I heard, is like really tough. It's like it's sort of unapologetic, and it's closure for Patriots fans and sort of a slap in the face. Like, all right, this is over. This thing that we all enjoyed for 2 decades is officially over. Bill's gone and it's over, and here's what it was. And that's that's sort of what the point of this documentary is. And I think that's going to be tough for Patriots fans and the Crafts and everybody to sort of go into next year knowing that it's the start of this new thing and new regime, and just you're so used to the way things have been all this time that's going to be a hard adjustment. But then again, you're also coming off a 4-win season, so anything better than that's going to be looked at as an improvement. So, in some sense, they have. I think it's a good thing to expectations. The bar's kind of low. 4 wins is a low bar to clear. But I also think like you have a bunch of guys doing jobs for the first time. Mayo's a first-time head coach. Elliott Wolf is like a first-time GM, which they're not even calling him the GM.
Yeah.
They won't even give him that title, which is very Belichickian, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
it is.
I don't
It
love
is.
that. But, Van Pelt is a first-time signal caller. Covington's a first-time defensive coordinator. Like, these guys are all doing their jobs for the first time. And you're also going to be drafting at 3, maybe, the quarterback who's going to be an NFL quarterback for the first time. And I don't love any of these quarterbacks. I'd be fine if they drafted Harrison at 3,
I agree
because
with
I
that,
think
yeah.
they need to start building this offense from the ground up. And if they just grab a rookie quarterback and throw him into an offense that hasn't been properly addressed, that kid's toast. He has no chance.
Yep.
He's going to be like, a lot of quarterbacks that have sort of come into bad situations. Every quarterback the Jets drafted for like 10 years, the Bears had a bunch of guys they drafted high, and it's just, they come into a bad situation. The offense stinks and the team stinks, and it's like, even a good quarterback sometimes can't fix that. We're gonna know what these Patriots are doing probably next month when free agency starts. If they start really going hard after targeting wide receivers, then I'd imagine if they sign a couple of those guys, they probably won't draft Harrison. They'll probably get the quarterback. If they, go straight for the offensive line and, take a flyer on Baker Mayfield or Ryan Tannehill or one of those guys, then that they're not going to draft a quarterback, and they'll probably go for Harrison or, shoring up the O-line. There's that kid Alt and, some of these other ones. That would bum me out if they use the 3rd overall pick on a tackle. But
Oh, I know. I wouldn't. That's such a Patriots thing to do, but
it really is, like it really would be. So I think we'll know a little bit more about what the plan is next month once free agency starts. They should be very active in free agency. They have a ton of money. If they cut J.C. Jackson, I think they have like $80 million to spend in free agency, which is a lot, and there's a lot of good wide receivers in the free agent class. There's Evans and, Pittman and Ridley and all those guys. And Higgins is probably going back to the Bengals. But the problem is the Patriots are just so bare on offense that, like, a guy like Mike Evans, he won a Super Bowl, like, you're going to have to really impress him with the offer that you make. Otherwise, what would he want to come here for? Like, the Chiefs need help at wide receiver. The Texans have a ton of money to spend. They were in the playoffs last year. Like, you're on the bottom rung of attractive landing spots for a wide receiver for sure. I mean, maybe for other positions, but definitely wide receiver. You don't know who the quarterback is. It's Van Pelt's a first-time play caller. You're not walking into some good offense where you just kind of slot in and, you're in the AFC Championship game. Like, you're part of a rebuild now. And does Mike Evans want to be part of that? Like, probably not. You're going to have to offer him a ton of money. So, that's going to be a problem for them. But I think it's something that they have to try. They have to go out there, have to be ready to overspend. They have to be ready to, give guys contracts that they're not getting offered by other teams, because that's going to be one of the only ways to land some of these guys.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely the type of season where they need to absolutely take advantage of the resources out there, because they haven't always maximized these types of opportunities in the past when it comes to getting, the right types of players in there to surround the quarterback with. And, that's why it was tough with Mac Jones. I mean, that kid had such a tough go here. I mean,
I think he gets screwed.
Yeah, but there was definitely, like some issues there, but overall, I mean, that's a tough situation for him to go into and ask him to be successful. And he just didn't have the help that he needed in New England to be able to succeed, and he took so much heat from people for it. But when you look at the roster that he was presented with, I mean, it's hard to succeed with those pieces that he had around him.
Definitely. And, his rookie year they spent in free agency. It was the last time they really spent. And I didn't love what they spent on. I liked Hunter Henry, I guess, and I liked Jonnu Smith. I thought Jonnu Smith was going to be good, but he was terrible. And I thought the wide receivers they really overspent on. I thought Kendrick Bourne was going to be like a 3 or a 4 at best. I never really liked Nelson Aguilar, and they gave big contracts to all 4 of those guys. And, I was glad that they were spending. And at the time, we didn't know if it was going to be Mac or Cam Newton. We didn't even know Mac wasn't on the team yet when they were spending all that money. But, like, you thought, okay, they're making a commitment to the offense. They're really trying to bolster that. And then when Mac got there, he had a good year. Like he had a good rookie year. He was a Pro Bowler, and they played in the playoff game, which they got their ass kicked, but they got there. So I mean, that was sort of like, you looked at it. Everybody was talking Bill Belichick's a genius again. Look what he did with this rookie quarterback. Look at how quickly he's turned it back around. They're back in the playoffs. Like, there was a real opportunity for Bill to cement his legacy with Mac Jones, and instead you're right. I mean, Jacoby Myers out the door. They never really spent on like a true number one wide receiver. They didn't give any sort of thought to that in the draft. Tyquan Thornton's the only receiver they drafted for him, and he stinks. And like, it's just that's a malpractice. I think that Mac Jones showed that he can play in the league and that he can be a good quarterback in the league. And they brought in a defensive coordinator and a special teams coach to be his offensive coordinators, and he probably didn't react well to it. But I mean, how well do you expect a guy to react to something like that? Like, that was a ridiculous move by Bill Belichick, and probably a fireable offense, like at the time. You go 8-9. I mean, that's not such a bad season that you fire the guy. 4-13 season certainly is, and that's what happened. I mean, that's the way it works. And I think that Belichick sort of brought it on himself. And I hate to say that because I love Bill. I mean, he brought a lot of joy to this region, and he's the best coach ever. But the way it ended, like, it's over. It's over, and there's a reason why it's over. It's because he screwed up at the end and left kind of a mess for everybody to try and clean up.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not a fun situation to be in either. And it'll be interesting to see, this next couple months really leading up to the draft, what types of things they're actually doing to improve this roster, because that definitely, like you said, is probably going to set the tone for what they do in the draft. And some of these quarterbacks I feel like are a little bit overhyped. I think there are Patriots fans who, are really, really committed to wanting one of these quarterbacks. And I mean, yeah, like maybe any of them could pan out in the NFL. You don't really know.
I don't like any of them. I don't like any of the top three. I don't like any one of them. I think Caleb Williams is too short. I think Jaden Daniels is too skinny. And Drake May is an ACC quarterback who never really accomplished anything. Like, if you're going to be an ACC quarterback getting drafted that high, I want at least one Heisman Trophy or one national championship, okay? Like, Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson won the national championship. Lamar Jackson won the Heisman. And Matt Ryan won the Heisman. But, like, other than that, ACC quarterbacks, like, if you're not dominating that conference, then I'm not really interested in you. I'm sorry. I'm just not. And Drake May, they weren't North Carolina wasn't dominant. Were they 8-5 this year? Like, they were fine. But, if you're coming out of that conference, I need you to be better than that. And I don't know. That's why I'm not really psyched about any of them.
It's more of like I think people are hoping that one of these guys will work out and be the Patriots quarterback of the future. But if that is going to be the case, they need a team around them first, like an offense that's competent in order to make that happen.
Yeah, look at Bryce Young in Carolina.
Yeah, like it doesn't matter who the quarterback is if they don't have the pieces around them. And I've also said to people before, like, I'm not overly excited about any of these quarterbacks either. I think, drafting one of them almost would feel like it's okay, we're drafting somebody because we have to, because that's what we need right now, more so than, there's so much potential in this player from this standpoint. It's more like it's still going to feel to me, if they do draft a quarterback at that position, that we need a new quarterback, like we need our future guy, and we're just going to hope that this works.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, that's sort of what happened with Mac. Like, he was the fifth out of the five that got drafted at the top of the first round there. And I know some other guys came after that, but, like, in terms of the top 15, like, I think he was drafted 15th. Like, he was the fifth out of five. You're probably going to be drafting the third out of three. There's a big three this year, and you're getting the third one. Unless they trade up. And if they really love if they really love Williams, or they really love May, or they just don't even want a chance not getting one of those two guys, fine. If they love all three of them, fine. But I don't know. You think they love all three of those guys? Like, it's just hard. I don't buy that. I don't know. I think, like, if you're in that spot, you can't just let someone fall to you and be like, okay, we got our quarterback. Like, if it's someone you really covet, maybe move up for him, but don't just let the third guy fall to you. Draft him and say, okay, we got our quarterback. We
like, settle, like, like we're good. We got somebody.
Yeah. Now,
that's what this really feels like to me in general.
Yeah. And if there were five guys, like last year there were five guys, or 2 years ago there were five guys, whatever Max rookie year was. And he was the fifth, and that was all on the top of the first round. And that could happen this year. Like, McCarthy may move up, Penix may move up, Bo Nix I've seen, in the first round and some of these too. So maybe I'm underestimating how quarterback needy some of these teams are, and, if they're willing to reach for a guy. But it seems like the three that everyone's been talking about and who they say could be going 1, 2, 3, or May, Williams, and Daniels, and I don't know. I don't really love any of those three guys.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of with you, and it's one of those things where, I would prefer drafting Harrison too, because that's a piece that I feel like could be incredibly valuable for this team right now, and then you could go out and try to address the quarterback situation. But this is a really important offseason for the Patriots. Like, this is just such what feels like a make or break offseason in terms of getting the correct pieces in place now that you have a fresh start with the coaching staff and new people coming in here to kind of look at the overall situation that's going on with this team. Now you need to get those core pieces in place, and however they decide to do that, we'll find out soon. But I mean, this quarterback situation is tough. I don't know that this draft class is going to get them exactly what they are going to need moving forward.
Yeah. I guess we'll see. I mean, and they need so much. That's the problem. Like on offense, especially, they need an offensive line. They need 2 tackles. They need a guard. I don't know if David Andrews come back. I think he is, but he's getting up there in years. Like, they drafted some offensive linemen last year, but it was like 4th, 5th, 6th round guys who had to fill in and didn't do very well last year. I didn't think so. Like, they have to start. I don't know if they have to start there, but they do have to address that. You can't bring in a rookie quarterback with no one protecting him. They probably need a quarterback. I don't really want to run it back with Mac Jones, but if they build the right kind of offense, if they build a real offense, I'd be okay with Mac Jones getting another shot at it, just because I think he got screwed so badly. But I think he can do better. And you need wide receivers, and they got some guys under contract who they're probably going to either have to cut or find some sort of role for. But like, between Chris Schuster and Devontae Parker, like, you got money tied up in those guys, and if you just cut them, then that's going to cut into the free agency spending you can do, because you're going to have dead cap there. So it's like, they really painted themselves into sort of a tough corner here. I think that's why you use a draft pick, right? Because like, if you run out of money or you have to really overspend on these wide receivers, at the very least you can say, well, we got Harrison. And, there's a couple other good wide receivers in this draft. Neighbors out of LSU, I like. Duze from Washington. Like, there's other wide receivers that I'd like them to maybe consider, even if they do get Harrison. And, you do have an early pick in the 2nd round. So if you want to go for a quarterback in the 1st, you can trade back into it if that's something that, you think is important. If you want to get McCarthy or Penix or Bo Nix or one of those guys, the next 3, which to me, I mean, I don't think they're that much different than the top 3, to be honest with you. So I'd consider that. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting the way Wolf sort of navigates all this, because he has a lot of decisions to make and a lot of holes to fill.
I know, right? Watch, they like nobody at number 3, and then they trade down. They trade out of the pick.
Hey, stranger things have happened. I mean, there's a lot of Elliot Wolf worked with Bill for many years. It's not like his influence has completely left that building. It's still there, I think.
that would cause such an uproar if they did that, though.
That or drafting Joe Alt, one of those 2 would be the least popular moves, I think.
I'm not putting it past them, though.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Do something like that. Well, it was an absolute pleasure having you on and talking about all these different teams.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks so much. You have me on anytime.
Yeah, I'll definitely, be hitting you up to come on again. And, as always, everyone, I always appreciate you tuning into the show week by week. And usually it's fun stuff, because usually we have at least one team that's playing well at the time. So that's always a plus. But yeah, this was an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
All right.